almost all Lovecraft stories are the same story over and over again. These are all the Lovecraft books I've read, 4 books containing 86 of the stories he wrote and co-wrote. At least 23 of those I read were co-written, and maybe half of all have to be the same story. There's not a lot of people that have inspired so many creators in different artistic fields as Lovecraft has. There are even moons on Pluto named after his creations. And if you consume a lot of different media, you're bound to stumble upon a work in any format that draws clear inspiration on Lovecraft mythos, or are Lovecraftian in themselves. Books, movies, comics, video games, manga, music, paintings, animations, probably even architecture. There's always someone expanding on the Lovecraftian myths in any given field. You always find the words cosmic horror and eldritch next to the name Lovecraft. He has developed horrors that are far superior to anything the human mind can comprehend. Humanity has no inherent significance in his universe, especially when compared to the gods that inhabit it. These beings are above all, and this place has been theirs for far longer than humans can imagine. Humanity is only a speck in time, with no greater purpose than to maybe be fodder for these masters, or in the best case, to serve them. His gods and monsters have never been seen before. For the readers, it's the first time you find something like it. For the unlucky people in the universe, it's only rediscovering the true masters of the universe and the realization that have been existing alongside them forever. They are your long-forgotten gods, only biding their time to return and bring the universe to the state it's destined to be. But while the horrors are new, you are always reading the same story, and this is not bad, not at all. Lovecraft has found the perfect narrative structure to create this terror inside the reader's mind. The themes become familiar the more you read his work, but they are always interesting. Cosmic horror, men unburying things that they never should, going to places where they never should have gone. It's a world where being ignorant is the best for your mental stability. Do not try to uncover every single thing there is, because you might get to regret it. Not because shining a light on things is bad, because there are things not for the human mind to understand. Humans are primitive and imperfect beings that cannot stomach the reality of the primordial and perfect beings we find in Lovecraft's creations. A glimpse upon the significance of these beings is enough to crash you, like a PC trying to do quantum calculations. I've really liked the stories where you find terror in genetics, and there are only a few of them, with the Shadow over Innsmouth being the most famous. And you get the most out of these genetic horror stories if you know a little bit about H.P. Lovecraft's life. It's like someone having a phobia of clowns and making horror stories about them, claustrophobia and making the movie Buried. This is only a part of his life, but one of the most fascinating, and how it's reflected in some of his stories. Lovecraft lived in fear of his own genetic makeup, to an almost obsessive state. He saw both his parents incarcerated in an institute for the mentally insane, with both dying there. At the time, it was already established that traits are hereditary. He didn't know what made his parents go insane and lived his life in a sense of doom, and that he's destined to follow his parents' footsteps into insanity. And these are all present in his stories. He best summarized his work in this quote: "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And there was no greater unknown than your own DNA and the secrets that were hidden inside of you." In The White Ape, an anthropologist discovers his ancestry to his horror, and The Rats in the Walls and The Lurking Fear explore the same fear of bloodline. In Lovecraft's lifetime, it was not possible to map the genetics of a person, so it represented the unknown, and he feared what could be hidden inside of him. Could there be diseases, insanity, or even non-human things that could shatter everything that you know and your own reality? In Lovecraft's case, the terror in genetics also has a basis of racism and xenophobia. To someone that considered his lineage to be superior, there could be nothing worse than to discover what he considered to be inferior people blood running through his own veins. But how he tells a horror story is a proven way to inspire fear in any of his readers and set their imagination ablaze with what could be really out there in our world. His stories are always in the first person, following the footsteps of classic horror stories like Shelley's Frankenstein, Stoker's Dracula, and his idol, Edgar Allan Poe. And this is how it reads. I'm writing this because I have to share this knowledge with you. Even if it's my last act in life, it's of the utmost importance that people should know the truth and the reality of our world and what we are dealing with. Everything I will tell you is the truth, and I'm the only survivor of this experience. Though I can hardly maintain my sanity as it is, I'll try to finish this testimonial for you all. I can see those horrible things still tormenting my vision, clutching at me to drag me away to the unknown at any moment. It all started when I stumbled upon this old book, documents, plays, news, or when I met this person, an investigator, an explorer, a scientist, a man of research and study, striving to push the bounds of human knowledge beyond or unravel the world. Our research was going well, though we did find some obstacles, but nothing that we couldn't solve. We felt we were closing in on our objective when things started getting strange. Then it became frightful, but no fear could ever compare with the sheer size of our curiosity and the benefits we could obtain. We went forward, and then we found the clues of terror, of what we had entered and what was to come, but we just couldn't stop here. The horror, did we find it? Or did they find us? With our sanity hanging by a thread, we made a run back to our world, but when I came out, I was alone. My companion is still there, with those things. Alive or not, I don't know. I hope he isn't anymore. Our obsession brought the end of him. If only we never stumbled upon these things and remained ignorant for the rest of our pathetic existence. I don't know if I can endure this torment any longer. I see now what we humans are. My reason is getting fainter. I see the gates of the asylum. I see those creatures waiting to drag me back to where I just escaped. I've destroyed everything there is to hinder those beings from ever awaken. At least I hope it does something. And this shall be the only proof of the reality of our universe. So these are the general points of a Lovecraftian story. A first-person narrative. I guarantee that what you're about to read is true. Most of the times, the action already happened and you're getting a retelling. The characters act out of curiosity and are related to a field that involves research. There's some supernatural element, like a book, a house, or a person, and those things lead our protagonist into a new world. They discover strange things that then become scary, that then become terrifying, and at last, they meet the horror. They escape with some kind of sacrifice. Lives, if they are companions, and sanity if it's a narrator. Our protagonist returns with the realization and the knowledge of doom. And the story ends with him descending into insanity or disappearing. Yes, it's close to a hero's journey, and it's perfectly understandable why it is so. Lovecraft was a student of mythologies, and we speak now of Lovecraftian myths as you speak of any civilization's mythology. His stories are interconnected. There are recurring characters, creatures, locations, institutions, and objects. And this creates a sense of a universe where this is all happening. But it's when other people use Lovecraft's creation that it became a mythology. When you find the Necronomicon in zombie movies, Arkham Asylum in comics, when you see people expanding on his universe and creating new things inspired by it. Lovecraft died 12 years before Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces was published, one of the most influential books ever. It summarized a lot of ancient myths of different civilizations into one formula, made up of 17 stages, now known as the hero's journey. Since Campbell, this formula is the basis for a lot of stories we have lived through, most notably Star Wars. George Lucas was obsessed with this formula and even interviewed Joseph Campbell on it. Since then, a lot of people have reworked this formula into more simpler ones, with Vogler being the most prominent and Dan Harmons the most recent people talk about. Campbell didn't invent or discover it, he just brought it to light. Lovecraft didn't have somebody to do the work for him or a book that summarized every myth. He had to study and analyze myths for himself, and this gave him a far better understanding and a lot to draw upon when making his own. So taking upon Campbell's 17-stage journey, because it's the nearest to what Lovecraft studied, this is how I would rearrange it to get a Lovecraftian journey. A journey into madness. I would cut out all the refusal stages. Lovecraft characters actively seek the journey. They are curious men of science or occultism. Phases 7, 8 and 12 are gone because there is no love in Lovecraft's world, and nobody wants to stay in them. Usually they want to withdraw the quickest way possible after the protagonist meets the horror, which I would consider to be phases 7, 10 and 11 combined. We are down from 17 stages to 13, but we are still far off from a Lovecraftian myth, because Lovecraft myths are not about heroes, they are about eldritch gods, monsters and aliens. In Greek mythology, some stories like Hercules show what virtues people should have, and others like Prometheus seek to explain parts of our world. And here's where Lovecraft brings his own twist to mythology. They are just to show the futility of mankind's existence and the history of his universe. So now I'm going phase by phase, saying how they apply to Lovecraft's work and how I would rename them. So let's go. The call to adventure, the classical definition, remains the same. The characters accept the call out of scientific curiosity. The second phase, supernatural aid. Sometimes our protagonist is the aid to a more competent researcher or explorer. In other stories, our protagonist does get an almost supernatural aid or access to grimoires or other documentation, like the Necronomicon. This phase includes both people and objects. Crossing of the first threshold remains the same. So does the fourth, Belly of the Whale, and the fifth phase, the Road of Trials. But now comes the phases where Lovecraft does his twist. Atonement with the Father/Abyss. I would take inspiration from an earlier Campbell stage that we cut, and called this one the Meeting with the Horror. And Campbell's definition remains almost the same as with what happens in Lovecraft stories, but with different results. In the hero's journey, it's confrontation. In Lovecraft, only a glimpse of whatever holds the ultimate power is necessary for the ego-shattering initiation. Then comes the seventh phase, apotheosis, the point of realization in which greater understanding is achieved. And this is one difficult point, because apotheosis means something like becoming God, and to Lovecraft's characters it is more like becoming a slave to the knowledge of doom and humanity's role in the universe. In Lovecraft, it's at the same time the highest point in development, since the protagonist achieved true knowledge, but also the lowest point, because of the realization that knowledge brought. I'll call this one apotheosis/nadir. Nadir meaning being the lowest point. The ultimate boon is cosmic horror. Our characters would be better off without this knowledge. These three stages could be put into one, since they occur instantaneously upon confrontation. And the next phases remain almost the same with Campbell's definition. The magic fight, the classic definition, still applies. Rescue from without is an interchangeable stage. Some stories, a narrator escapes without any help. In other stories, he only escapes because of the help, sometimes with the companion sacrificing himself for the narrator. The crossing of the return threshold, instead of being about retaining wisdom, it becomes about retaining sanity. It's still about the character accepting the reality of life after witnessing the horrors and doom. In Lovecraft's myth, no human can become a master, only a slave to the realization. There's a complete imbalance in the character. And the final phase, 13, the biggest joke would be freedom to live. There is only imprisonment to despair. And this is what I think is a Lovecraftian structure found in most of his stories. And Lovecraft's legacy is a statement for the effectiveness of this story structure, on how it settled itself inside the readers' minds for a century and let them continue his mythology in their own creations. Thank you a lot for listening. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Please let me know what you think about this Lovecraftian story structure and what you would change. Thank you a lot for listening, and I see you on the next video.